Princess Diana was known to the world not because of royal jewelry, but as one of the most influential and widely discussed women of her time, even though those jewels became part of her public image.
So, lawyers have reportedly confirmed that William is legally locking down one specific item Diana left behind, something that sat quietly, unclaimed, for almost 30 years, and it's not what anyone's expecting. The part that really gets me is that this item was never in the will, never in the official records, nothing.
Now then, next month, a collection of personal items relating to Princess Diana are set to go up for auction, offering a unique view of the then Lady Diana before she became the Princess of Wales.
Just sitting there, waiting, and now it's his, permanently. Before we get into this, if you have an idea what that mystery item might be, drop it in the comments below, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Diana's will. Long before anyone was talking about lawyers or legacy disputes, there was a single piece of paper that ended up shaping almost everything that's happened to Diana's personal belongings since her death. A document most people have never actually read in full. To get the full details about this letter, keep watching, because what's written in it is about to matter more than anyone expected. When Princess Diana died in August 1997, she left behind a formal will, signed years earlier in 1993, and then quietly updated after her divorce from Charles was finalized. That will do the standard legal work. It named her mother, Frances Shand Kidd, and her sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, as executors, and it placed the bulk of her estate, roughly £21 million, into a trust for William and Harry. But alongside the formal will, Diana wrote something far more personal, a private letter of wishes, signed the very next day. Unlike a will, a letter of wishes is not strictly binding under UK law. It's closer to a set of instructions, guidance for whoever ends up carrying out someone's final decisions, explaining not just what should happen, but why. In that letter, Diana was specific about two things in particular. First, she asked that 75% of her jewelry and personal belongings, referred to legally as chattels, be split evenly between William and Harry, with the remaining 25% divided among her 17 godchildren. Second, and this is the detail that's largely been forgotten outside of royal circles, she expressed a hope that went beyond simply handing possessions down. According to those close to the estate at the time, Diana wrote that she hoped her son's future wives would one day wear her jewelry. It was not framed as a legal instruction, rather, it was framed as a wish, something closer to a mother imagining a future she wouldn't get to see, her sons grown, married, and her own jewelry. Pieces she wore during some of the most significant and painful years of her life, living on through the women they would eventually choose. Now stay with this next part, because this is where the story actually gets complicated. That single wish is really the emotional center of everything that's happened since, and it's worth understanding just how complicated the path to fulfilling it actually became. William and Harry were only 15 and 12 years old when their mother died, far too young to inherit anything directly. Diana's will specified that they should receive their full share of her estate at 25, with access to income from the trust starting earlier. But in December 1997, just months after Princess Diana's death, her executors went to probate court and obtained something called a variation order, effectively asking a judge for permission to change the terms of her will. Without notifying the parents of any of the godchildren involved, the executors secured a delay, pushing the age at which William and Harry could receive their full inheritance from 25 to 30. The stated reasoning was protective. According to them, it was an attempt to shield two young princes from a windfall before they were mature enough to handle it responsibly. But the practical effect was that the wedding dress, the jewelry, letters, photographs, home movies, even the handwritten score to Candle in the Wind, all of it sat in storage, cared for by Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, for close to 2 decades. William turned 31st in 2012 and received his formal share. Harry followed in 2014, at which point the full 150-item collection was finally and completely distributed. 28 of Diana's dresses, several of her most iconic evening gowns, 2 diamond tiaras, additional jewelry pieces, and her wedding dress, the one with the 25-foot train that remains the longest in British royal wedding history. All passed to her sons at last, 17 years after she died. For years afterward, pieces of that collection quietly resurfaced in public. Not through any announcement, but through the women who wore them. When William proposed to Kate Middleton in 2010, he gave her his mother's own engagement ring, the sapphire surrounded by diamonds that Diana had worn since 1981. Kate has since been seen wearing other pieces from that inheritance too, including one of Diana's tiaras and a set of sapphire earrings. On the other side of the family, Meghan Markle wore one of Diana's Cartier bracelets during her widely discussed 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, a moment many royal watchers saw as a quiet, visible fulfillment of exactly what Diana had once hoped for, her jewelry and by extension a piece of her, continuing on through the next generation of women marrying into the family. For a long time, that seemed to be where the story settled. Diana's wish had technically come true. Both sons had received their share. Both had, at different points, seen their wives wear pieces from that collection publicly. It looked, on paper and in practice, like a wish fulfilled cleanly across both branches of the family.
It's interesting looking at the two personalities. As they've got older, it's clear that Harry's really a Spencer in personality. He's got that very Diana tempestuous.
But here's the part that changes everything. That neat resolution assumed something that, at the time Diana wrote her letter, she had no way of anticipating. That both of her sons would remain equally rooted within the same family, the same institution, living the kind of life she'd hoped to protect them within. She wrote that letter imagining 2 brothers, close in age, likely to grow up walking parallel paths, marrying, raising children, and remaining part of the same royal world she alternately loved and fought against. Nothing in the letter accounted for the possibility that one brother might eventually step back entirely, relocate across an ocean, and build a life largely outside the institution his mother spent years trying to shield him from in the first place. That gap between what Diana assumed when she wrote those words in 1997 and where things actually stand today is reportedly what's now quietly being revisited. Not the legal distribution itself. That was settled over a decade ago and isn't in question. What's reportedly under review is something more specific and more sensitive, whether the spirit of Diana's wish, protecting her jewelry, and by extension something deeply personal to her, within the family she raised her sons inside, still holds the same meaning it once did, given how differently things have unfolded since. But despite all of this, years down the line, it was discovered that one of Diana's most cherished possessions, a piece many assumed had simply vanished into the wider collection, had actually been set aside for William alone from the very beginning. Which possession was that? Stay tuned, because we're about to find out. What William inherited: Diana's watch. Most people don't know this part, because it never comes up next to the tiaras or the ring. Right after Diana died, William and Harry were each allowed to pick one personal item from her jewelry to keep for themselves. William didn't choose anything flashy. According to Paul Burrell, Diana's former butler, William chose a Cartier watch, a piece Diana had received not from Charles and not from the royal family, but from her own father, John Spencer. Burrell's word carries weight here. He worked closely inside Diana's household for years.
Julie Andrews, and she said to me, "I'm buying this house. I'm buying this house to give William and Harry a new perspective on life."
And was one of the few people trusted with details of her private life, which is exactly why this small, quiet detail has stuck around in interviews over the years, without ever becoming a bigger story. To understand why William's choice matters, it helps to know who John Spencer was to Diana. He was the 8th Earl Spencer, and by most accounts, one of the steadiest people in an otherwise difficult childhood. Diana's parents divorced when she was young, a painful, very public split that left her mostly in her father's care, first at Park House on the Sandringham estate, then later at Althorpe, the Spencer family home. Biographers have often described her bond with her father as complicated but steady, a source of stability during years that were anything but stable. He remarried a few years after the divorce, and while that brought its own tensions into the household, Diana reportedly still stayed close to him, visiting Althorp often as she grew older, even after her own marriage to Charles pulled her deeper into royal life. The watch wasn't a royal gift, it was personal, given from father to daughter, long before Diana ever became Princess of Wales. That timing also matters here. Diana had that watch before she met Charles, before Buckingham Palace, before she became one of the most photographed women alive. It belonged to a part of her life that had nothing to do with the crown, a part shaped by a father's love rather than public duty. People close to Diana have said items like that meant something different to her than the jewels the palace lent her for official events, simply because nobody could take them back. They were hers, fully, in a way very little else in her adult life was. Even years later, after she'd become one of the most recognizable women in the world, friends have said she kept a handful of pieces like this close, not for how they looked, but for what they reminded her of. So it makes sense why William's choice stands out. Given the option to pick from dresses, tiaras, and jewelry tied to some of the most famous moments in royal history, he picked the one item connected to Diana's life before any of that. Back when she was simply someone's daughter. People who followed the family closely have pointed to this as fitting a pattern with William, less drawn to the public image of his mother, more drawn to the quieter parts of who she was before the world was watching. It's a pattern that shows up elsewhere too, in how he's spoken about her privately over the years, rarely referencing the famous photographs or headlines, more often mentioning small, ordinary memories instead. Now here's where things shift. For years, this watch barely came up publicly. It got mentioned occasionally by former staff, never treated as important next to the ring or the tiaras that usually dominate stories about Diana's estate. But according to people familiar with more recent private legal conversations within the family, that's starting to change, and here's why. Diana's letter of wishes was specific, stating that her jewelry should go to her sons and eventually be worn by their wives. That covers items meant to be public, worn at events, photographed, and passed down visibly. The watch was never part of that. It was chosen informally, by William alone, right after her death, with no instruction from Diana about what should happen to it afterward. That gap matters more than it looks. Something deeply personal, tied directly to Diana, sits completely outside the legal plan she actually wrote. It was never listed among her chattels, the legal term in the UK for personal belongings. It was never touched by the court order that delayed the rest of the estate for over a decade. Nobody, not Diana, not the courts, not the family, ever formally decided what should happen to it long term. It's valuable, meaningful, and legally undefined, sitting in a kind of quiet gap nobody's ever closed. According to sources close to the family's current legal planning, that's exactly what's now being addressed. Reports suggest William has been working with his legal team to formally record the watch as his, permanently, not just as something he happened to pick decades ago, but as something protected and settled for good. Given everything the family already went through with Diana's estate, the ignored letter of wishes, the years-long court delay, the disagreements over what she actually wanted versus what her executors decided instead, it's not hard to see why William might want at least one piece of his mother's legacy locked down for good, with no room left for anyone to argue about it later. There's more to this timing than it first looks, too. Sources suggest this legal review isn't happening in isolation. It's reportedly connected to the same broader shift we touched on already, the quiet acknowledgement that Diana's original hope, two sons raising families side by side, staying equally close to the family and the institution, simply hasn't played out the way she pictured. If that shift is already shaping how the family handles the rest of Diana's legacy, it makes sense it would touch this too. An item with no instructions attached to it at all, being settled now, at a moment when interpretation matters more than it has in years. And that's really what this story comes down to. It was never just about a watch. It's about protecting something that survived Diana's messy, disputed estate almost by accident. Something she gave meaning to long before anyone imagined her sons disagreeing over what she actually wanted. If these reports hold up, William isn't just keeping a piece of jewelry his grandfather once gave his mother. He's reportedly making sure that, this time, nothing about it stays open to question, delay, or the kind of quiet disagreement that shaped so much of what happened to the rest of her estate. That still leaves one big question. If the watch was never officially part of Diana's estate to begin with, what actually gives lawyers the power to protect it now? That question matters more than it seems, and it's exactly where we're headed next, so don't go anywhere. How William plans to secure the watch and his mother's legacy. So, under United Kingdom law, personal belongings like jewelry are called chattels, two ways they can pass from person to person. The first is formal, spelled out clearly in a will or a legally binding letter attached to it. That's how the bulk of Diana's jewelry collection was meant to work, at least on paper. The second way is far less formal. Someone simply gives an item to another person. No paperwork, no court involvement. Nothing beyond the act of handing it over. That's exactly what happened with William and the watch. It wasn't listed anywhere. It was simply chosen, informally, in the raw, grieving days right after Diana's death. Items passed that way are not unprotected exactly, but they're also not documented anywhere official. If nobody ever writes it down, there's technically nothing preventing future disagreement about who it belongs to or what should happen to it later, especially decades on, when memories fade and the people who witnessed the original moment, like Paul Burrell, are no longer the only ones telling the story. And it doesn't end there, because this is precisely the gap lawyers are said to be closing now. Sources suggest William's legal team has been working on something called a deed of gift, a fairly simple legal document that formally confirms an item was given, and by whom and to whom, so it's no longer just a memory or a second-hand account from a former butler. Once something like that exists, the watch stops being an informal keepsake with a nice backstory and becomes something legally settled, on record, and difficult for anyone to dispute going forward. Given everything that happened with the rest of Diana's estate, the ignored letter of wishes, the 17-year delay caused by the variation order, it's easy to see why someone in William's position would want at least one piece of his mother's legacy handled differently this time. Reports suggest that's really what this comes down to. Not preventing a dispute that currently exists, but making sure one never can. It's a small, quiet kind of correction, one item settled properly. Decades after the rest of Diana's estate went through years of disagreement nobody anticipated when she first sat down to write her wishes. And once you understand that, a document like this stops looking small. It starts looking like part of something much bigger. That legal picture is really only half the story, though, because a document like that doesn't happen in isolation. It fits into something much bigger about how William has approached his mother's memory for years now, quietly, consistently, long before this particular watch ever came up. In July 2021, William and Harry stood together at Kensington Palace to unveil a statue of Diana in the sunken garden, on what would have been her 60th birthday. It was only their second public appearance together since Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal life the year before, and by most accounts, both brothers were closely involved in shaping how their mother would be remembered, right down to small details in the statue's design and setting. For a brief moment, whatever tension existed between them was set aside for something they both clearly still cared about equally. More recently, William launched Homewards, a 5-year program aimed at ending homelessness across several UK communities. A source close to the project told The Telegraph it wasn't just William's initiative. It was framed explicitly as continuing something Diana cared about deeply, since she was known for taking her sons to shelters and exposing them to life outside palace walls when they were young, quietly teaching them things no formal royal education ever could. That detail isn't incidental. It shows up again in more recent reporting on how William has been reshaping the Duchy of Cornwall itself, including a housing project in Newquay tied directly, according to these reports, to lessons Diana taught her sons about empathy and life beyond royal privilege. Keeps repeating. Diana's values quietly built into projects that, on paper, have nothing to do with her at all, yet somehow trace straight back to her every single time. Even away from formal programs, the pattern holds. When Queen Elizabeth's digital memorial launched earlier this year, William was among the first to share a personal tribute, choosing a quiet memory rather than anything tied to her public role. Tea at Windsor, watching her ride in the Great Park, small moments most people never got to see. Taken together, these moments suggest something consistent. William doesn't tend to treat his mother's legacy, or his family's history more broadly, as something to display. He treats it as something to actively manage, protect, and quietly carry forward, whether that's a public statue, a housing program, or, according to these reports, a watch that's never officially belonged to anyone until now, sitting quietly in a drawer for nearly 3 decades before anyone thought to make it official. That's really what makes this particular story different from the usual headlines about royal disputes or family drama. There's no confrontation here, no public disagreement, nothing dramatic enough to make the news on its own. It's something much quieter than that. It's about one man, working steadily behind the scenes, making sure the small personal pieces of his mother's life don't get lost the way so much of the rest of her estate nearly was, buried for 17 years in storage before anyone even saw it again. In the end, what Diana actually wanted protected was never really about jewelry, or watches, or even the wedding dress everyone remembers. What Diana actually wanted protected was never really the jewelry itself. It was her sons, and everything she hoped they'd carry with them long after she was gone, long after the palace, the headlines, and the version of her the world thought it knew. A watch, quietly settled after almost 30 years, sitting in a drawer through all of it, might be the smallest possible way of finally getting that right. Not loud, not public, just one small promise, kept properly. Decades later than anyone expected, but kept all the same. So, do you think William was right to quietly protect something this personal? Or should every piece of Diana's legacy have been settled in the open from the start? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more. And if you want to see what happens next, check out the video on your screen right now.